Bonjour à toutes et à tous.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hereby declare this meeting called to order. Welcome to meeting 95 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Industry and Technology. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders. And pursuant to Standing Order 106.4, we are meeting today following a request by members of the committee to discuss a request to undertake a study on the recent investigation and reports of Sustainable Development Technology Canada. Let us begin with opening the floor to discussion of this request for a meeting. I'm prepared to recognize whomever wishes to manifest themselves. Mr. Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, committee members. Maybe I could do a quick outline. This company, this SDTC, is actually set up arm's length, as we know from the government. It's not like a crown corporation. It's a separate foundation. It was set up in 2001. And about 10, 12 years ago, it was a bit of a mess. And so the government of the day changed the board, brought in a board chair to clean it up, who hired a new president to try to clean it up. And it got a governance gold star from the Auditor General in 2017 for governance. In 2019, on a week's notice, the former Minister of Industry changed the board chair and a couple of members on 1 week's notice to the current chair. And the result of that has been a restructuring of a number of the funds and the investment processes. Now, in my view, the current chair should have never been appointed. She had a conflict of interest going in that SDTC had given her company already a $9.5 million grant, which had to have continued follow-up from the company. And this set a different tone for the organization about conflicts of interest. As a result of that, a number of whistleblowers came to the minister and to the Privy Council office in January to outline a whole series of questionable transactions and relationships between the board and a number of the companies that are not only receiving grants from this organization, but also the companies that are hired from the outside to do evaluations of each grant proposal and their questionable relationships with board members. And as we know, when you sit on a corporate board, and I've sat on private and Crown Corporation boards, it's not just about a real conflict of interest, it's about the perceived conflicts of interest. Those are just as important in our business as well. And it appears from what has been reported on whistleblowers that there are many instances not only of conflicts, but of restructuring the funds outside of the mandate letter or the mandate agreement they have with the government. The government gave 35 months ago, the Liberal government gave this organization $750 million more of taxpayer money. And the current minister became the minister 1 month after that. So he's been overseeing this organization for 34 months, yet was totally unaware of the governance changes, the investment process changes in this organization, which his ministry had just given $750 million of taxpayer money. So the result of those whistleblower comments, and I'll outline, those whistleblowers are doing something unusual because they're not protected by government whistleblower policy, which is an issue. They have come out and put themselves on the line and are not protected by the Government of Canada's whistleblower policies because these conflicts are so egregious. As such, as the committee that's responsible for the operations or the reporting of the operations of the industry department, otherwise known as I said, the minister, all its Crown corporations, its agencies, and its estimates, financial estimates, which includes the financial accounting and public accounts of the expenditures of ISED and all its organizations, including SDTC. we need to take a look at this. Now, it is true that the minister, upon receiving this, the current minister, did ask for what is called a fact-finding report from Grant Thornton, which has been presented. It was a very narrow mandate that was given to it, much narrower than the accusations that were made. But we do also know from the media last week that a number of senior ISED officials called this the greatest sponsorship, greatest scandal we have in the government of taxpayer money, maybe $100 million or more of taxpayer money allocated in a conflict since the sponsorship scandal of the Chrétien government. So I believe it's incumbent upon this committee to examine, as is our responsibility to Parliament, the expenditures, processes, and impacts of all of these management and governance changes at this organization to which the industry department is accountable. And I understand, Mr. Chair, that requires a meeting motion, which I'd like to put forward now, and I think the clerk has copies if she would like to distribute it. And I can read this, and we'll presumably have a bit of a discussion here in the committee about it, that in relation to the recent investigation and report on Sustainable Development Technology Canada, otherwise known as SDTC, showing a breach in conflict of interest rules and misuse of public funds, the committee undertake a study of up to 6 meetings to investigate these allegations, and the committee invite the following witnesses to appear before the committee: François-Philippe Champagne, Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry; Doug McConchie, Chief Financial Officer and Assistant Deputy Minister and Corporate Services at Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada; Annette Pasharian, it says here former chair, she's the current chair of SDTC, so that's a typo on the written one. She is the current chair. Whistleblowers who have come forward, and any other witnesses deemed relevant to the study put forward by parties. I would probably also put forward the president of SDTC as a witness we should hear from. And subject to the approval of the recognized party whips and the availability of meeting slots from the House of Commons, the committee hold additional meetings or extend our current committee meetings beyond an hour on each allotted day for each meeting on this matter, with the goal of not delaying the study of Bill C-27. So that's the end of the motion. The idea is to give the committee 2 options we could follow. We could add additional meetings, which I know is more difficult, but I think from our whip's perspective, they would work to find the resources. But the easier solution, since we meet on Tuesdays and Thursdays, is to add an hour to the meeting after the C-27 testimony for the next number of meetings to consider this. So with that, I will turn it back to you, Mr. Chair, for others to comment.
I've got Mr. Massé and Mr. Lemire, but just for precision, Mr. Perkins, you're asking for one more, one possibility you've highlighted in the motion is 1 more hour at the end of meetings. Would that count as one meeting?
Yes.
By the terms of your
Yes.
motion, because usually meetings are 2 hours. So
Yes.
Okay. I've got Mr. Massé, Mr. Lemire, Mr. Turnbull.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for agreeing to start this discussion on this with the motion that we can work with. I agreed to this meeting because a couple of things. My interest over whistleblowers and protecting them. I've talked to some of the former employees here. We had the Minister at Ethics yesterday, where my primary concern in all of this is obviously due process, but also the position that I've taken is, provide the workers that are still there with equivalent public service jobs if they wanted to leave that agency and go on a lateral move somewhere else within the civil service, something we can do to protect them. And it'll probably also ensure that the process that the minister is going through right now is thorough. So for me, it's about protecting those families that are there, and that's the bottom line. The agency gets away from an environment that actually has a union. The agency gets away from greater accountability to protect the public servants, because even though their salaries are pretty well virtually 100% paid by the public, they're not protected in the same way. I see this as an entire issue over social justice and abuse of workers. So until that we actually have those guarantees in place, then I'm prepared to meet as much as possible to continue to bring that message on a constant basis for us. And I'll be a broken record on that because I think it is something we can control. When I'm talking to the different people that were there that have moved on, I can tell in their voices the sincerity and the concern, the mental health, and the stress leave that many have actually, some of them have gone on. There's not enough employees for them to actually hide if they're one of the ones coming forward. And so I know a third-party lawyer has been engaged, but I don't necessarily trust that process either. So I'll conclude by supporting this motion until the government provides some assurances to those workers beyond what the minister's saying right now. I repeatedly went after the same thing through 3 exchanges, and I'm still not satisfied with, those people have to live through this process. And the longer it goes on is problematic. So if this in the parliamentary system right now is going to expedite that, then I think that's better for them than actually going through a long, drawn-out process if they do want to get out of this environment and have no choice. So that's the preference that I have, and that's the position that I have at the time. Thank you very much for your time and to the bringing this forward.
Merci, Monsieur Massé. Monsieur Lemire.
Thank you, Mr. Massey. Mr. Lemire. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Perkins. First of all, for the motion. And full transparency here, I would have been happy to sign it as well if the French version had been made available and given to me in advance, because I think there would have been 3 parties and 6 signatories requesting this meeting, which is, of course, of great concern in terms of the use of public funds. I agree with what my colleague has just said regarding protecting whistleblowers. There's something absolutely fundamental there to our democracy. I would have a suggested amendment on the motion being presented. I would perhaps suggest 2 meetings rather than 6. If we're talking about short 1-hour meetings, maybe we could do something there. But the idea would be to save time because we've got a heavy agenda, a very full agenda with C27. Is there some way of being able to change the part that says the committee invites the following witnesses to appear? It could mention that any information obtained in the standing committees of access to information, protection of privacy and ethics regarding this matter be communicated to INDU, including the testimony of the following witnesses, or those who testified or who will testify, including Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry, François-Philippe Champagne, and the 4 other points also apply. And where needed, we reserve the right to re-invite those witnesses or any other witness deemed to be relevant, but we don't have the obligation to re-hear all of those people. And that meeting could take place after the whistleblower's testimony at INDU, so that we could have additional information that could be complementary, so that our study at industry would be more relevant, because I think we're the right committee to examine this sort of motion. Very well, we have an amendment being moved by Mr. Lemire. Perhaps some members would like you to repeat it, because it was rather lengthy, but if I understood the essence of it, you're talking about rather than having 6 meetings of 4 hours, and that the information collected by ethics and privacy protection be conveyed to this committee, and that the list of proposed witnesses not necessarily be compulsory. That this could be either improved or we could re-invite them based on needs, but the timing is very important, so that we should be able to do this after the whistleblower's appearance at ethics. So we could be complementary to that study rather than adding our voice at the same time to be redundant in terms of the study being done.
I had Mr. Turnbull, so we're now debating the amendment proposed by Mr. Lemire. So if it's on the amendment, Mr. Turnbull, and then I have Mr. Viss and Mr. Perkins.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I fully understood the amendment, but maybe I'll just state that what I understood was to have 2 meetings instead of 6, and then I think to perhaps have either the sharing of witness testimony from other committees so there's no redundancy in terms of who we hear from at this committee. Could I maybe just check without yielding the floor whether Mr. Lemire can confirm that that's what he's suggesting? Okay. Look, I wanted to make some general remarks on this amendment and the motion as a whole, just to let you know where I stand on it or where we stand. I won't speak for all my colleagues here, but I think it's safe to say that we take this matter seriously. There were allegations of mismanagement. The minister has known about those and hasn't been sitting on his hands. He's acted, as you know, and as Mr. Perkins said, and probably heard in the testimony that the minister gave last night at Ethics, because I know Mr. Perkins and Mr. Massey were both there. Mr. Massey, I know you got to ask the minister questions, which is great. But we know that the minister asked for an independent review of the agency based on the allegations of mismanagement, and that review has been complete, and that has resulted in an action plan. It's resulted in the freezing of the accounts for SDTC. All of this is public knowledge. And that now, on top of it, the Auditor General is looking into or is doing an audit. So we know that process is underway. We also know that our ministry has also hired a firm to do an HR management review as a parallel process to the Auditor General's audit. And we also have two other committees looking at this. Public Accounts and Ethics are looking at the very same topic and doing a study on both. Was I wrong about that?
Yeah, I think only ethics so far.
My understanding is Public Accounts has had the Deputy Auditor General appear, and they're talking about this matter as well. Do you want to clarify that, or I can get you evidence of that if you dispute that, but that's my understanding. So, so there's two other committees at least looking into this. So I'm wondering, why it is that our committee, I understand that as many committees as desire to do this can do this work, but to me we have important C-27 government legislation that we all have said is a priority for our country. It's legislation that hasn't been updated in 20 years. So I think we all agree that that's a high priority. So what are we trying to accomplish here by having another committee do the very same work that two other committees are already undertaking in Parliament? And so that's what I would say, is that this feels to me like there's a lot already being done. The government has been very transparent, open, diligent, and willing to cooperate with the Auditor General and takes the matter seriously. We've said numerous times in the House of Commons, I've answered many questions about this in the last few weeks, and said, we really take the federal agencies and the governance, the standards of governance that they uphold seriously, and they need to be held to the highest standard and held to account. So we think that from our perspective, we're doing that. I think this feels like a bit of a delay tactic for C-27. That's what I'm going to say, because for me, what is it that this committee is going to do over and above those other two committees, which to me have already started to undertake this work? They've heard from key witnesses. Members from this committee have gone over and subbed in and participated in the Ethics Committee as of last night. Well, you were there and you heard the testimony. You were listening in. So
That's why I need to do it.
Auditing the committee.
Just Mr. Perkins, this is not an exchange between Mr.
I don't know.
Turnbull
It's
has
okay.
the floor, so Mr.
So
Turnbull.
I appreciate that, Chair. But the point is, if another committee or multiple other committees are doing this work, what is the need for this committee to have an emergency meeting to undertake this very same work that's happening in other committees? So that's sort of what I see. And I'm not saying that this isn't an important issue, by the way. I am agreeing that it's important. But why would we have three committees doing the same work in parallel? That seems like a waste of resources and time. And we have important government legislation that everybody has said is very important. So I think, I would sort of say that those are the sort of key points that I wanted to put on the record. I think, we're happy. Oh, I guess one of the other things that I didn't mention was that the report itself has been provided, redacted report has been provided to committee members at the other committee, I believe at Ethics. So they've got a redacted copy of the report that's only taken out the confidential information. So that report has been made available to those committee members. So I guess my key here is how do we ensure that we're not duplicating efforts? Because I think we all agree that our time is valuable and we want to do useful work. And if this study is being undertaken at Ethics, which seems like, to me, the most appropriate place for it to happen, to be honest. If members are talking about conflict of interest, that relates to the Ethics Committee's work. And I think it seems to me that we don't need 3 studies going on in parallel. So maybe others want to comment on that. But I would say that Mr. Lemire's attempts, I do appreciate the attempts at amending the motion because I think it hopefully would enable us to alleviate delaying our work on C-27, which I appreciate very much.
Thank you, Mr. Turnbull. So just for members questioning, those aren't bells for a vote. That was for a quorum call. So that's why we don't need unanimous consent to continue. But would it be useful for members maybe to have Mr. Lemire read into the record again the terms of the amendment, or it's well understood by everyone? I'm looking around the table. C'est envoyé. Okay, so donc l'amendement a été envoyé à la greffière.
The amendment has been sent to the clerk and will be circulated so that everybody can have it.
Clarification, Mr. Chair, was it 2 meetings, so 4 hours, or was it?
Good point.
So we would do 4.
C'était ça. On peut modifier 2 heures.
We could change the 2 hours to 4 or up to 4 hours. I think a good way of phrasing it would be 2 meetings or up to 4 hours.
4 hours if they were split in 1 hour. I think that was the essence of what Mr. Lemire. So I had Mr. Viss, then Mr. Généreux, and then Mr. Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Am I able to speak to the motion itself or the sub-amendment?
We are on the amendment.
We are on the amendment only.
Yeah.
Okay, well, can I respond to Mr. Turnbull's comments then that were in relationship to the the amendment or the motion itself?
You can go, Mr. Viss, on
okay.
But we're debating the amendment right now, so try.
Okay, well, in respect to time, I can discuss that. So what we've put forward in this motion is 6 hours, and I guess what we're arguing for in the context of Mr. Lemire's amendment is whether we're going to study this for 4 to 6 hours. In respect to relevancy, it is this committee, whether we decide to or not, which determines ultimately through the estimates process whether SDTC and Industry Canada can actually fund this organization. And although through, I would say, multiple governments of all political stripes, the powers of committee or the powers that committees hold to approve or disapprove of parliamentary spending have not been used to their full benefit in the way that I believe taxpayers would want us to act accordingly. I remember fondly in 2015 that the Prime Minister mentioned repeatedly that committees would be independent of the government, and he made a promise that parliamentary secretaries would not be sitting at committee tables because he wanted to have them at arm's length from the government. Obviously, that is not the case at all. So I don't take Mr. Turnbull's. I agree with Mr. Turnbull that there is some work being done already in respect to this motion, but it is this committee with the responsibility under the standing orders to review and approve of how money to SDTC is being spent. The fall economic statement is coming at a time that's it could come any day. We don't know. The budget will be coming in the next few months, and I think it is imperative of this committee with its responsibilities under the rules of Parliament, which dictate we approve or disapprove where money from Industry Canada goes, that we give it its due attention, and we look at whether or not this organization should receive any additional funds. Obviously, the government has taken it so seriously that they have said that they're putting a freeze on it. That's a pretty drastic action. That's not something the Minister of Industry or anyone in government ever does, especially with this government that has spent more money than any government in the history of Canada. For them to shut off funding for a primary conduit to fund startups in the clean tech industry is a massive indictment in and of itself that there is something extremely wrong with what is taking place at this organization, at this non-for-profit funded by the Government of Canada. So my point is this: it is our responsibility under the standing orders and the organization of Parliament that this committee undertake its due diligence to determine how money is spent in Parliament, which organizations are allocated money, and it is imperative that this work take place prior to the estimates coming before this committee when the new fiscal year starts. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Viss. And I understand the amendment has been circulated by the clerk to all members. J'ai Monsieur.
I have Mr. Généreux, followed by Mr. Perkins. Thank you, Chair. Regarding Mr. Lemire's amendment, I would like to remind my colleagues, and as Mr. Viss just said, about the independence of the committee. I would like to remind them very politely that the House of Commons has regularly said that committees are independent. I hope that my Liberal colleagues will have the decency to truly respect the recommendation of their minister, who keeps repeating in the House that committees are independent. This being said, Mr. Lemire, as far as your amendment is concerned, I'd like to point out that in Quebec, the Charbonneau Commission and the sponsorship scandal here in Ottawa in the 1990s required sustained efforts, very significant efforts on the part of elected officials, public servants, and whistleblowers in some cases, to ensure that a full light could be shone on all of these scandals. Could we use the word scandal for the issue at hand today? Appearance would seem to indicate that this is so. As my colleague Mr. Viss just said, for the minister to freeze all funds, there is something fishy, clearly. So if we were able to have our 6 meetings, we're here to work. And I understand Mr. Turnbull's point of view, and I respect his point of view, because we want to avoid redundancy of the work of one committee by another committee. But as Mr. Viss said, and I repeat, as far as industry and innovation is concerned, this is the committee to be dealing with it, specifically in terms of all of the funds being dispersed. So quite sincerely, I think 6 hours are not too many. And in terms of the witnesses, I think we could leave the door open. I don't have any problem with that. But I think that we must clearly have the whistleblowers and the administration of this organization. Thank you.
Thank you. Merci, Monsieur Généreux. Je comprends.
Thank you, Mr. Généreux. I understand that Mr. Lemire's amendment has been sent, at least the English version, is not exactly consistent with the French. But both versions have been sent. I'm reading both, and I see that the English version doesn't say.
Again by the clerk with the English version. However, the English version does not refer to 2 meetings. It still has 6 meetings in it, so there might be a bit of an issue, but I understand that Mr. Lemire is working to send it around again in both official languages, but okay, then what I...
Can I just do one response to the one before you and then adjourn?
Yeah, so I've got Mr. Perkins and then Mr. Massé. You're okay, Mr. Perkins, even if you don't have the English text to comment on the
I didn't
amendment?
realize it's not the attachment, it's in the email.
It's in the email,
Yeah.
in the text of
Yeah.
the email. Or do we want to take a few
No.
minutes to suspend to make sure that everyone's got the proper amendment? Or okay,
Okay.
then we'll do that for maximum 5 minutes. Meeting suspended.
Ça en vient.
in both official languages to everyone. And I'd now like to recognize Mr. Perkers, who had the floor, and followed by Mr. Massey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and my sympathies for the translator who has a bad cold, it sounds like. I've been grappling with it for a couple of weeks. Hopefully yours goes, you deal with it quicker. So on the amendment, I think on the number of hours, I was trying to provide the committee with a couple of different options. Either we do separate meetings or we just tag them on. And I think the 6 meetings I was proposing were the 6 meetings of an hour addition onto each of the existing C27 meetings. So it's about 6 hours, which is not far off, I think, where Monsieur Le Maire is proposing. And MP Turnbull, just in response to the issue of delay, well, it's not a delay if it's an hour on the end of the existing meetings that we're already having on C27. I haven't proposed that we stop anything at all on C27. I agree with you, and I think we're all in agreement, the need to do a thorough examination of what's been so far a very fascinating testimony from witnesses on that important bill. In terms of what's not clear to me, I guess, first of all, I don't think it's the same work as the Ethics Committee. I attended just out of general interest. I wasn't invited to go. I just showed up to listen and see what the minister had to say. My line of questioning that I want to ask the minister about is very different than what the members of our side did on the Ethics Committee. Our work and our responsibility with regard to the estimates and the public accounting of the industry department and all of the billions of dollars it expends each year is different than the Ethics Committee. So I think our look at it is actually a little different. With regard to the sub-amendment that's here, the only thing that I'm really concerned about is that I'm not clear on this issue about when we would start. I do believe we need to have the minister. I do believe we need to have the chair. I do believe we need to have the president of the SDTC. And I'm not sure that we can hold off to figuring out what ethics is doing with the whistleblowers. I don't even know if whistleblowers will agree to attend any committee because the nature of whistleblowers is it's quiet and behind the scenes. And I think we can start our own work, which probably, given this timing, since we're coming up to a constituency week next week, would probably not start until we return from the constituency break before we would look at any of this. I'm not suggesting that it would start on this Thursday. Then we're on a break, so a riding break. So it would probably be another 2 weeks before almost 2 weeks before, well, 2 weeks today, I guess, before we would start at the end of that meeting. So initially, my thought is I would probably vote against this amendment if it meant that we have to wait until ethics has gone through a number of their witnesses before we do anything. I don't think we can wait. I think we need to get at it. We need to start making the decision and invite the minister to come, minister and officials to come in the first meeting when we return from the constituency break. Obviously pending his availability. He's got a busy travel schedule. So I would think we can do that, and we would do it over, let's say, 6 hours and 6 meetings. For now, I think we can get what we need to get done. If there's a way to mash Monsieur Le Maire's motion together with ours to make sure that's clearer, I just provided 2 options. We could do separate meetings, or we could do it at the end. So I understand why it might have been a little confusing about which way to go. My personal preference is not to schedule more meetings, is just to add an hour on to each of the existing meetings we have. And certainly not to substitute it for the work that we're already doing on C27.
Just to clarify, my understanding is that based on the amendment of Mr. Le Maire, it doesn't require for us to wait until EFI has completed its undertaking with regards to this matter. Monsieur Le Maire, je ne sais pas si c'est comme ça que vous le voyez dans votre amendement, mais c'est ce que Monsieur...
Mr. Le Maire, I'm not sure if you have that in your amendment. This was being proposed. Well, yes, so that we could not repeat the work already done and that we could devote the time wisely to studying C-27 and hearing witnesses. If I may, if I can make an aside, the definition of our committee is that the Standing Committee on Industry and Technology should make studies and prepare reports on activities and expenditures of Industry Canada and members of its portfolio, as well as other things. So we are directly, that's us in this committee, so we should be the ones. And I think we have to show that diligence. But if anyone else is doing it, I think that we can take over following so that we can go a little further and deal with the issues affecting the members for the industry.
Okay, merci.
Thank you, Mr. Lemire. Mr. Massey, then Mr. Williams on Mr. Lemire's amendment.
Things come to mind. First of all, it's not unusual for a same subject to be going concurrently through different committees, including this committee, because it is so overlapping, and there's plenty of examples for that. I guess the thing that, I was there because Matthew was out of town, was out of actually the country, so I happened to be the person that could fill in for him and worked out that way. But I'm not willing to cede this responsibility and the workers' lives basically to the ethics committee when we're actually directly responsible for that agency in this chamber right here. And I'm not willing to pass that up. I mean, ethics had its own thing going on. In fact, the meeting had to be suspended because of the conduct of certain members where the chair actually had to suspend the meeting. We don't have that problem here, thank goodness, Mr. Chair. But that's what actually took place at ethics. We had to actually cease operations because of the conduct of members there. And so, to me, it's about me doing my job. And also, too, is that there was going to be a legislative change. The minister said we can't change the legislation. Well, the reality is we can actually change the legislation. If we change the legislation under this framework, it would come from this committee. It would come as a recommendation. It wouldn't come from ethics to change the legislation there because it's a different set of responsibilities. So I'm not going to let those families down. I'm going to do what I have to do here to make sure that they're actually going to get the proper supports necessary, because they have to go in, again, every single day as this continues to go on, whether it's in the public or behind the curtain. And if it's not going to be behind the curtain, then I want to make sure that it's going to be done by members of this committee. This issue was also brought up at Science, where it was turned down. This issue might go to Environment. It might go to other committees. So I know that there's been it shopped around quite a bit. But the bottom line is, I also don't want to have the professional public embarrassment of being part of a committee that turns its back on the responsibility that we're mandated to do by the essence of being on this committee. That's what's being asked here, is for us to actually to turn our backs on our responsibilities, and just because it's convenient to let ethics do their own thing, we don't do our job here. And that's critically important to understand that. I understand the importance of C-27, but very few times does a committee basically stop the sun and the earth from moving and put itself in a position where it can't do anything else because of a bill. And by the way, the government never brought that bill into the chamber for the longest period of time, despite being urged to do so. And on top of that, we had the own minister here and a whole drama that continues to go on with amendments. And that's actually led to a public campaign, if you check your emails right now, of people calling us right now to stop C-27. And that's actually coming not only just from ordinary citizens, it's coming from NGOs, the academic community, a whole host of different things. It's turned into a giant mess. But what I do know is that the individuals here in this issue is in our wheelhouse. And I'm not willing to cede that. I'm not willing to cede that to the Ethics Committee, to the Environment Committee, to Science Committee. To me, it's very important that we do something on this. And for me, it's about protecting the whistleblowers and the workers. And if we don't do anything and ethics muddles on this, then those workers then have to wait for us to come back and revisit this to try to find another way back in the issue. And I really worry about that for their mental health, and the way that they have to deal with this going to work every single day is that we have to actually, in ethics, they actually debated, I've had an amendment to give the chair some grace to scheduling when the witnesses or the whistleblowers would come forward, because there was only 2 dates presented originally on that time. And I amended that to give the chair more flexibility, because given my experience here, when you have that flexibility, but they only have that within a 1 week time. So if something happens with the whistleblowers, and it could be even things that we don't imagine, where things at work turn because of all this public things that are going on right now, and it becomes a different environment that's currently there because of that. So for me, I don't want to let this be dragged out any further, but I also don't want to make sure that we end up being basically passively supporting the lengthening of the duration of this just because we don't do our jobs here because we're willing to brush it off to ethics. And it's a totally different environment. So I'm okay with the 4 or 6 hours as long as we can't, we don't do, because I'll be quite frank, because if we have to do more for the workers, I'll be the one out there putting motions forward to actually increasing the hearings. And I'd rather not delay C-27. I'd like to do whatever we can to keep going on that, despite all the failings of it, but don't use it as a shield to basically say we don't do our jobs here. So I'll support the time change as an amendment to start, but I'll be the first to ask for more time, if necessary, to actually get to the bottom of this if we don't get protection for the workers. And that's what I want from the government. They have done some good things. There have been some positive things that the minister has done, but they still don't protect them because we chose as Parliament to make them vulnerable to this situation. And by the way, these boards and the CEOs and the ones that have been, these are political appointee positions. So, yeah. And so that's kind of where I see things to go. So I appreciate that, and I'll end it there. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Massey. I have Mr. Williams, always on the amendment presented by Mr. Lemire.
That's right. And Mr. Just very brief, Mr. Chair, I think we all can agree that we want to stand up for the whistleblowers. I think we can all agree that ethics is doing its job with conflict of interest breaches. Our job is to look at the program and the misuse of $150 million so far. I think we're looking at it that it has to be 6 hours because of the workers, because of the people that step forward, because of the whistleblowers, that we have to put, I think, that time in for them. So I would hopefully see that we set the 6 meetings. I think that's important. I think if you look at the calendar, that's only going to take us to the break. It fits kind of within the schedule. It just means that for the committee, we have to do 3 hours instead of 2 for 6 meetings. I don't think that's out of line. I think that still allows us to do C-27. I think at the same time it does the important work that this seems to be, and I think 6 hours is even pretty low. That would only be 3 meetings and any normal 2 meetings. So I think if we'll probably go against that amendment just to make sure it is 6. It needs to be 6 hours for the workers. I think that's just fair to them. They put a lot of work into these documents, and I can tell you from past experience, any staff who put their livelihood, quite frankly, in the line to be a whistleblower, they have to be commended, protected, but also we need to be doing the work on their behalf. Lastly, this is the committee. This is the minister that's responsible to this committee only. So certainly I think we should be studying that here and thoroughly, and that's what I think we intended in the first motion. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so I see no more comments on the amendment presented by Mr. Lemire. Hence, I would ask the clerk to put it to a vote.
Mr. Gahir. Madame Lapointe.
Ms. Lapointe.
Mr. Turnbull.
In favor.
Mr. Sorbera.
In favor.
Mr. Van Bynen. In favor. Mr. Generer.
Cool.
Mr. Perkins.
Opposed.
Mr. Viss.
Opposed.
Mr. Williams.
No.
Monsieur Lemire.
En faveur.
Mr. Massey.
Oui.
Okay, donc l'amendement est...
The amendment is carried, which brings us back to the motion as amended by Mr. Lemire's amendment. Mr. Perkins' motion as amended by Mr. Lemire. Are there any other comments regarding the motion before us? This is the amended motion.
Friendly amendment to the motion to amend it by including Leah Lawrence, the president of STDC, in the list of people to appear before the committee.
Just so we're clear, there is no such thing as a friendly amendment, Mr. Viss, even though you can be very friendly yourself.
Well, I thought it was very friendly.
It's just an amendment, so you're proposing an amendment which
Yes.
then needs to be debated and voted on.
Thank
so,
you for the semantics. Yes.
Okay, so there is an amendment by Mr. Viss. Just say. Can you repeat just so Leo?
Want to include Leah Lawrence. So point E would become point F. And point E under the amended motion would include the name Leah Lawrence. Je vais essayer de le faire en français.
I'll try and do it in French. Add the name Leah Lawrence to the list of witnesses. Replace E by Leah Lawrence, and the current E would be F. Thank you.
Yes, I have Mr. Turnbull.
I'm a little bit confused. So the motion has been amended, and Mr. Viss is making an amendment now to the motion, which has already been amended. But he referenced E and F, I think, sections, which I'm not sure exist anymore. There's only A and B, and a list of witnesses that appear before other committees whose testimony would now be used for our work. So I'm not sure what exactly, I'm not sure how to understand what Mr. Viss has proposed.
So if I understand correctly what Mr. Viss is trying to do, it would be adding a fifth point. So after whistleblowers who have come forward, fifth Leah Lawrence. Is that what you're...
Yeah, it could be anywhere on that list. I just want to add Leah Lawrence.
Okay. So that's the amendment proposed by Mr. Viss. I guess it could be argued that it could fall in any other relevant witness, which is in the motion, but I understand you want more clarity, so that's the purpose of your amendment. So there's an amendment on the floor, colleagues. Mr. Turnbull.
I would just say I think that witness appears in ethics tomorrow, I believe. So if that witness is already appearing, then I guess it's just another witness testimony that we would get before this committee, right? So that's...
Well, I can't be at ethics committee tomorrow. I got to be here, or doing not here, but doing other work. And I want to have the opportunity as a member of this committee to have her before this committee.
So we're debating the amendment by Mr. Viss, and I'm looking around the table to see if there are more speakers. Seeing that there are none, I will call the amendment. And is it clear to everyone? So we're adding a fifth section after, I guess, whistleblowers who come forward, the name and title of the...
So, Chair, just to be crystal clear, Mr. Viss has asked to add a fifth section or a fifth point underneath section A of the motion, right? A of the motion says that all information obtained in the context, right, and it lists the other two committees, right?
Is this correct, Mr. Viss?
And then it's adding to that list a V or a 5, Roman numeral, and then adding a witness, Leah Lawrence. Is that correct, Mr. Viss? I just want to make sure I'm crystal clear on what we're voting on.
And Mr. Viss, you're
The question. What I am seeking to do in this amendment is to add Leah Lawrence to the list of names clearly outlined. So we're gonna. I'll state them all. We want to have Francois Philippe Champagne. We want to have Doug McConaughey. We want to have Annette Vercheron. We want to have Leah Lawrence, whistleblowers who have come forward, and any other witnesses deemed relevant. That's what I'm seeking to do.
So I think that answers the question Mr. Turnbull was asking. So in section A, so 5 Roman numeral, adding the name Leah Lawrence, because you're looking at the motion that before was amended, Mr. Viss. So you have to look in your emails to look at the amended version, which would give you more solid footing to.
That's fair.
Okay. But we've
Yes.
reached an understanding as to what is sought by this
My
amendment.
apologies for that.
And if there are no more speakers, I would just 1 second. Okay. So, yes, Mr. Turnbull, before we bring
So
it...
I agree with adding the witness. I think we should just pass this amendment on unanimous consent and have the witness added to the list with unanimous consent if the committee is willing to do that.
Is there unanimous consent to the amendment proposed by Mr. Viss? Yes. Okay. Which brings us to the main motion as amended by Mr. Lemire and then sub-amended by Mr. Viss. I have Mr. Perkins.
The clerk's just getting a proposed amendment to the main motion, which essentially changes the beginning part where it says 2 meetings. I don't think we want to hold separate meetings outside of this. Back to 6 hours over 6 meetings concurrent with Bill C-27, beginning on November 14th. And then the amendment's coming. You can always make amendments to the main motion.
Yeah, but was that part of the amendment?
I believe. Just 1 second, I have a point of order, but I believe that's amending the part that was already amended, Mr. Perkins. But
yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's substantially similar to what we already voted on, which is an amendment to that section.
we just
Sort of going back.
just as
Starting date, and it's 6 hours over 6 meetings.
well, the number of meetings and hours was just quite clearly voted on the amendment presented by Mr. Lemire. So I would rule that proposed amendment that you're suggesting now not to be receivable, given that it's already been voted on. However, you've mentioned a starting date.
November 14th.
That is not in the. I'll just consult with the clerk to make sure. But and are there any other terms to the amendment you're proposing to the main motion, Mr. Perkins?
No.
Okay, so yes, Mr. Turnbull.
So, Mr. Perkins is asking to start this on November 14th. Isn't that a constituency week?
It is.
So are you? Yeah, I mean, maybe you want to do the week after, unless maybe we should just have 6 hours on Monday morning next week. Want to do that?
Not next week.
Yeah, the constituency week. Why not?
Okay, just to bring some order. I've ruled irreceivable the number of meetings a part of your amendment, but the starting date hasn't been discussed nor voted on. So, Mr. Perkins, just to be sure.
Starting the week of Monday, November 20th, and then we can figure out what days you want to do that, given the limits of resources.
Yes. So that will be will have to be skillfully negotiated by our clerk with the House administration, so that we get these meeting hours. But so everyone's heard the term of the amendment, which would be just Mr. Perkins. What would be the wording exactly? That.
Let's go back to the motion. Sorry. Well, just at the end of allegations, which is, I think, in the English, right? Beginning the week of November 20th.
Yeah, so beginning the week of November 20th, the committee undertake a study of up to
Right.
2.
Right, that would be better, probably.
Okay. So everyone's heard the amendment. Is there, should I call it to a vote, or is there unanimous consent on this vote? So we'll go for a vote on the amendment by Mr. Perkins. Madame la Greffière.
Mr. Gaillard. Pardon me? Madame Lapointe.
No.
Mr. Turnbull.
No.
Mr. Cervera.
No.
Mr. Van Bynen.
No.
Mr. Jennifer.
Wait.
Mr. Perkins.
Excuse me. Yes.
Mr. Viss.
Yes.
Mr. Williams.
Yes.
Mr. Lemire.
No.
Mr. Massey.
Yes.
Sorry, point of order, Chair.
One, oh, point of order.
Yes, Mr. Gahir.
I have a fever right now. Just seeking UC to change my vote to a no.
So do we have unanimous consent to allow Mr. Gahir to change his vote to a nay? So,
I'll give unanimous consent, but I just want to consider it as a no.
so Mr. Gahir asked unanimous consent to change his vote from a yay to a nay. Is there UC on this? I see no objection. So Mr. Gahir's vote has been changed to no. So the amendment is rejected. Defeated. The amendment is defeated. Hey, colleagues, à l'ordre, il y a beaucoup de discussions là, sur le côté.
There are a lot of sidebar conversations. I think it's important to follow the deliberations of the committee, too. So Mr. Perkins' amendment has been defeated, which brings us back to the main motion. Are there any other comments regarding the main motion as amended?
None, then I would ask the clerk for a vote. Or can the motion as amended be passed with unanimous consent? Monsieur le maire? Just
Pour élément de discussion, j'en fais pas nécessairement une.
For discussion, I won't necessarily make a formal motion, but for the 27, I could agree if we were to do it after to be as consistent. Is it necessary for this to be sub-amended? This is perhaps just a conversation to have with you and the clerk, Chair. Because as there's no specific date in the motion, yes, I just wanted to be saying that the spirit of what I had proposed was to begin after ethics heard the witness, which was going to be in the week of the 20th or the 27th. So you're not proposing an amendment? No. It's just to help the president choose the dates. I understand. So do we approve the main motion as amended with unanimous consent? Yes? Very well. Motion is carried. Mr. Turnbull and Mr. Perkins.
I think we've had a very productive meeting today. I wanted to move that we adjourn today's meeting.
so this calls for a vote. This is in the committee business is a subcommittee meeting, so on C27. So there's a motion to adjourn on the floor. So this calls for an immediate vote. I'm not sure that I can accept the point of order once I've called the vote, but yeah. So, Madam Clerk.
Mr. Gahir.
Vote for? To adjourn?
To adjourn.
To adjourn. Yeah. In favor.
Madame Lapointe. Sorry.
Oui.
Mr. Turnbull.
In favor?
Mr. Sorbera.
In favor.
Mr. Van Bynen.
In favor.
Monsieur Généreux.
No.
Mr. Perkins.
No.
Mr. Viss.
No.
Mr. Williams.
No.
Mr. Lemire.
No.
Mr. Massey.
No.
Okay, so the motion is defeated, which brings me to give the floor to Mr. Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to move a study motion that the committee, I think the clerk may have a copy of it, that the committee begin a study of at least 5 meetings examining the impact of Canada's carbon tax is having on the nation's continued decline in productivity, as noted by the OECD's ranking of Canada of last when compared to Western economies. That the study include an examination of the United States' approach to investing in green technology through the Inflation Reduction Act and not carbon taxes as a major factor in Canada's decline in economic output compared to our most important trading partner, the United States, since 2015. We're,
So, Mr. Perkins, I understand that you're bringing this motion forward today, but notice has not been given, and we're under 106.4 now.
no, we voted
So-
on the 106.4, so
But
we're no
we're
longer
still
on 106.4.
on the 106.4. It's the 106.4 calls for a meeting to discuss a potential study. It's not, once we've adopted the motion, we're still in that 106.4, which you've asked for.
Right.
So I
Which we
can't-
also asked
and-
to include discussion of which we agreed to the committee agenda, and we're still an
Well,
open
with
committee.
that is why notice was sent by the clerk for the subcommittee to meet and discuss the agenda and the committee business, which we're supposed to do right now. But
Well, you lost the adjournment vote because I know you don't want to discuss things in public.
Right now we're on this 106.4, so I can't understand. I can't accept motions of committee business that
So
are
the
not
committee- the
that are not
committee's
pertaining
refusing
to the
to-
106.4. That are
The
not
committee's
pertaining to the
refusing to accept a motion to do a study, as I outlined on the carbon tax and its impact on our economy.
Well, it's not that, Mr. Perkins. That notice needs to be sent for a motion like this, and it can be brought forth, as you know, in a regular committee meeting, but this is a 106.4. Notice has not been given of the motion, that's all.
I understand
And
that,
you're
but we're
an
still an open
experienced
committee.
parliamentarian who
We're-
knows
we're-
very well.
But we have finished the 106.4, so when we are still an
Well,
open committee.
the meeting is the 106.4, Mr. Perkins.
No, the meeting is our general Tuesday meeting, of which I agreed to allow the 5 days to extend to 6 days last week out of courtesy to the chair and to the committee members in order to deal with it since the witnesses for today on C-27 declined to appear. So I could have forced this meeting to happen yesterday as per the rules of the House of Commons. And in an effort of collegiality, I said, no, I'll move it to today in order to work with the fellow Liberals. But apparently the Liberals want to shut down any discussion about the harm that their carbon tax is having on the Canadian economy. And will go to any end to shut committees down.
Okay, well, Mr. Perkins, that's just, I don't see, well, as chair.
This is
I
a
just say
normally
this is
scheduled meeting.
This is a very procedural point.
This is a
not
normally
Point of order,
scheduled
Mr. Chair?
committee.
Yes, Madame Lapointe.
Seeking clarification is, through you, is MP Perkins challenging the chair?
Sure, I will
Well,
challenge
at
the
this-
chair's
at this
decision
point-
on
At
this.
this point, Mr. Perkins, we're not in committee business. We're on the 106.4 you asked for, and as I was informed also by the clerk after consulting with the clerk, this is not a receivable motion for which there has been no notice given. Now I'll recognize
I'm challenging
Mr.
the chair's ruling on that decision.
on that decision, so then it'll call for a vote.
So the question is, shall the chair's ruling be sustained?
Shall the chair's ruling be sustained?
Mr. Gahir,
Yes.
Madame Lapointe.
Oui.
Mr. Turnbull,
Yes.
Mr. Sorbera,
Yes.
Mr. Van Bynen.
Yes.
Mr. Genereux,
No.
Mr. Perkins,
No.
Mr. Viss,
No.
Mr. Williams,
No.
Mr. Lemire,
Oui.
Mr. Massey.
Yes.
So the chair's ruling is sustained.
Okay, so then we're done with this. Okay, so now we're still on the 106.4, even though the motion has been adopted to conduct the study. As per the notice that I've sent and for which I've received absolutely no objection to by any member here, we were supposed to have 1 hour because Mr. Perkins, you told me the 106.4 would take 1 hour. And the rest would be committee business, which I sent notice for the subcommittee to meet to discuss the rest of C-27 and how we would go forward with C-27. So are we in agreement to adjourn the meeting and go to the subcommittee? Perfect. Meeting adjourned.